Imagine you are dragging yourself outside to do just a really mundane chore.
Oh, the worst.
Right, like maybe you're scrubbing a dirty piece of garden clutter, and you're still getting over a weekend cold. You just want to get it done.
Yeah, you're not in the mood for surprises.
Exactly. So you lift up this heavy, muddy pot, and you realize you haven't just moved a piece of debris. You've accidentally triggered a biological simulation of a tropical rainy season.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and you have stepped squarely into the middle of a bustling, high-stakes maternity ward.
It immediately forces you to abandon whatever mundane checklist you had in your head, right? I mean, you go from being a casual gardener to, well, to an emergency wildlife manager in the space of about 2 seconds.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really fascinating personal online journal entry. It's simply titled Notes on Fishkeeping Part 325.
Great title.
Yeah, very understated. It was written by a hobbyist named Ang, and it's dated August 23, 2026. So Ang sets out to do some very basic tidying of an outdoor pond setup and ends up documenting a real-time lesson in microecosystem management.
I think we quite the bit it.
It really is. So we're going to explore what this tiny aquatic world teaches us about, human infrastructure, how wildlife violently adapts to our backyards, and the hidden biological mechanics happening right under our noses. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, the entry starts with a scenario I think anyone can relate to. Aang is recovering from being sick and decides to do some light decluttering around the outdoor ponds.
Right.
Specifically, there's this one at the edge of the property. And the stated goal is just a head count of the fish and washing some very basic equipment, like a terracotta pot and an EPS foam box.
Yeah, and we should probably define what we are looking at here, because this isn't, it's not a pristine, high-tech indoor glass aquarium with the fancy LED lights and automated filters.
We're not far from it.
Right. When Ang says EPS foam box, we're talking about expanded polystyrene. It's essentially a repurposed styrofoam shipping cooler.
Yeah, the kind you'd get like steaks shipped in or something.
Exactly. And it's being used as a makeshift pond or a filter housing. It is a highly insulated, really cheap, and very common hack in the outdoor fish keeping hobby. So Ang is out there scrubbing this standard terracotta planter pod that was just sitting in the water and discovers something entirely unexpected.
The surprise inside.
Yeah. A pair of polar parrot cichlids had quietly bonded, claimed this pot as their home, and deposited a fresh spawn of eggs inside.
And to give a clear picture of the fish we are dealing with here, because it matters, polar parrot cichlids are actually a human-engineered hybrid species.
Okay.
They have these bulbous, somewhat comical round bodies, usually with pale blue or striking white and black tiger stripes.
They look kind of cute, honestly.
They do. But despite their slightly goofy appearance, they carry the genetics of convicted cichlids.
Oh, and those are tough.
Very. Which means they are fiercely territorial, highly intelligent, and incredibly aggressive when it comes to defending their offspring. They're what we call cave spawners.
Meaning they need an enclosure.
Exactly. They actively seek out enclosed, defensible spaces to lay their eggs where they can guard just a single entrance.
Right, so Ang is mid-wash, just scrubbing this pot, and suddenly realizes it's a nursery. The journal entry details this immediate spike of anxiety. Ang writes about, being unsure whether the cleaning of the pot will affect the eggs, but just kind of hoping they will eventually survive.
It's a natural reaction to panic a bit.
It is, but I have to admit, I read Ang's panic about moving the pot, and my first thought was, I don't know, aren't we anthropomorphizing these fish a bit?
How do you mean?
Well, it's like moving a piece of furniture in your garage and finding a bird's nest, and you freeze in a panic, hoping you haven't just disrupted this fragile new family. But these aren't delicate indoor goldfish. They live in an outdoor pond. They are exposed to wind and rain and temperature swings.
Right.
Shouldn't a fiercely territorial fish be hardy enough to handle their terracotta cave being shifted a few feet without completely abandoning their eggs?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the fragility isn't about the physical hardiness of the eggs themselves. It's about the psychological geometry of the fish.
Psychological geometry. Okay, what does that mean?
So cichlids do not perceive their environment the way we do. They map their territory through strict spatial boundaries.
Landmarks.
Exactly. A rock here, a root there, the flow of the water current across the opening of their cave. All these elements form a highly specific topographical map in their brains. When you move that terracotta pot even 2 feet to the left, or pull it out of the water and plunge it back in, you haven't just moved their house. You have completely destroyed their map of safety.
Oh, wow. So the environment no longer matches the coordinates they deemed secure for raising young.
Precisely. To the cichlid, The sudden change in water flow, the light angle, the surrounding landmarks, it triggers an absolute predator calamity response.
Predator calamity.
Yet, their biological programming tells them the cave's been compromised, so Aang's anxiety is entirely scientifically justified. The mere act of shifting the pot can signal to the fish that the environment is suddenly too hostile to sustain a new generation.
That is wild. And it drastically reframes the interaction between our human housekeeping and these natural life cycles. I mean, we view a terracotta pot as a piece of decorative clutter that needs the algae scrubbed off.
Right, as a chore.
But the fish view it as prime, defensible real estate. Nature just takes our random infrastructure and immediately repurposes it for survival. And Aang quickly pivots from scrubbing to trying to figure out how the spawn happened in the first place. And here's where it gets really interesting.
The detective work.
Yeah, Aang traces the arrival of these eggs back to a broken piece of equipment.
The EPS foam box we mentioned earlier.
Mm.
Aang notes that it had been slowly leaking water for an extended period.
Because of that slow leak, Aang had been regularly manually topping up the styrofoam box with fresh tap water just to keep the water level stable. And Aang theorizes in the journal that this annoying repetitive chore, just pouring fresh water into a leaky box, is actually what triggered the fish to breed.
It's an amazing observation.
Right. The constant influx of new water simulated the sudden temperature changes of a heavy rainstorm. And I love the irony here. How often do our mistakes or broken systems actually create the perfect accidental illusion of nature?
It's brilliant. It is a brilliant deduction that shows a deep understanding of aquatic environmental triggers. We often think of breeding as being tied solely to, seasons or daylight hours.
Like birds in the spring.
Exactly. But for many tropical and subtropical fish, the primary catalyst is barometric pressure and water chemistry.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. So in a wild ecosystem, a long dry period means water levels drop, temperatures rise, and the concentration of fish waste, like ammonia and nitrates, builds up in the water. It is a time of biological stagnation.
Kind of like a drought.
Yes. Then the rainy season hits.
Hmm.
The rains fall, and suddenly millions of gallons of cool, fresh water flood the river systems.
Which completely flushes everything out.
It does a few critical things. First, it drastically drops the water temperature. Second, fish possess a sensory organ called a lateral line.
A lateral line.
Yeah, it runs down the side of their bodies. This lateral line detects microscopic shifts in water pressure and movement. They can literally feel the barometric pressure of the storm dropping and the physical influx of new water currents.
That is incredible. They are essentially built-in storm trackers.
They really are. But most importantly, the rain flushes out the built-up nitrates and washes vast amounts of terrestrial insects, minerals, and plant matter into the water.
Oh, so it creates an instant buffet?
An explosion of microscopic food. It's known as infusoria, and it blooms almost overnight. The fish's biological algorithm registers this massive influx of fresh water as the beginning of a period of intense caloric abundance.
And they don't know they're in a styrofoam box in Aang's backyard.
Not at all. They just feel the cool water hitting their lateral lines, they sense the dilution of nitrates, and their instincts scream that the famine is over, and it is the safest possible time to bring fry into the world.
So Aang's leaky box essentially hacked their biological programming.
Completely.
By just trying to keep this broken styrofoam cooler functional with a garden hose or a pitcher of tap water, Aang accidentally orchestrated a perfect simulation of the seasonal floods. It is just incredible to think about how our mistakes, or the systems we consider broken, can inadvertently create the exact friction needed to spark a major biological event.
And it requires a high level of observational skill to draw that line of causality. I mean, many casual hobbyists would just patch the leak and assume the appearance of eggs was random luck.
Right, they wouldn't connect the dots.
But Aang looked at the inputs and the outputs of the pond and recognized the invisible mechanical forces at play.
So wait, if the eggs are suddenly here, inside this pot, what does that mean for the rest of the pond? Because Aang's journal entry points out a massive logistical headache that immediately follows this discovery.
Housing crisis.
Yeah. The original goal of doing a quick Sunday cleanup is gone. Now, Aang has to initiate a complex relocation program. Aang decides to move the brooding pair, along with the terracotta pot holding the eggs, entirely out of the pond and onto the backyard balcony.
Which is an incredibly risky maneuver, given what we just discussed about a cichlid's spatial mapping. Aang writes about this with genuine apprehension, stating, well, quote, Let's see if the brooding pair will acclimate and survive in the new environment.
Because it's totally different.
Moving them to a balcony introduces a completely different thermal dynamic, different sunlight exposure, and the sheer trauma of the physical move itself.
And Aang isn't just relocating the parents and the new eggs. There is another layer to this puzzle. The journal mentions that there are several juvenile fishes from a first spawn swimming around.
The older siblings.
Right. So Aang has to catch these older juveniles and introduce them into a totally different outdoor pond, one that is already populated with guppies.
A busy neighborhood.
Very. Aang specifically notes that this guppy pond will provide an alternate environment for these fishes to grow up. So what does this all mean? Like, why can't all these fish just stay in the pond they were already in? It kind of reminds me of a busy school principal or a traffic cop, right?
How so?
Well, the toddlers, the eggs, and the brooding parents are getting sent to the quiet, isolated balcony for nap time, while the teenagers, those older juveniles, are being thrown into the bustling outdoor pond with the guppies to learn the ropes of the real world. Why this crazy separation?
It comes down to the biological zoning of aquatic environments. In a natural, massive ecosystem like a lake, the water column acts like an enormous apartment building.
Okay, an apartment builder.
You have different generations occupying different floors to avoid competing with, or frankly, consuming one another. The tiny, newly hatched fry stick to the shallow, heavily weeded penthouse near the shore.
Makes sense, lots of cover.
Exactly. The mid-sized juveniles might occupy the middle depths among fallen trees, and the large adults roam the deep basement of the open water.
But in a backyard pond or a styrofoam box, that apartment building is completely flattened. There are no floors. It's just a single-room studio apartment.
Exactly. When you compress that ecosystem, the natural separation disappears. If Aang leaves the older juveniles in the same confined space as the new eggs, those juveniles will simply view the eggs as a high-protein food source.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And if the parents spend all their energy fighting off their own older offspring to protect the new eggs, the stress will eventually cause the entire social structure to collapse.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Aang is being forced to manually manage the physical space because the ecosystem isn't large enough to manage itself. The balcony becomes the isolated nursery ward, and the guppy pond becomes the turbulent real world where the teenagers are sent to fend for themselves.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
But you mentioned earlier that moving the pot could trigger a predator calamity response in the parents. What happens if they get to the balcony and the stress is just too much?
This is where the biological economy of survival gets somewhat brutal.
Okay.
If the brooding pair determines that the new balcony environment is too exposed, too cold, or just fundamentally unsafe,
Yeah.
they will not simply abandon the eggs to rot. They will consume them.
Wait, they eat their own offspring.
They do. It sounds horrific from a human perspective, but it is a masterpiece of evolutionary calculus.
How is that a masterpiece? That sounds awful.
Because creating a clutch of eggs requires a massive depletion of the female's internal resources. She transfers huge amounts of proteins and fats into those eggs. If the environment dictates that those eggs have a 0% chance of hatching and surviving, say, because the territory was just violently moved by a giant human hand, leaving them to die is a total caloric loss.
Oh, I see.
By consuming the eggs, the parents reabsorb those vital nutrients. It is a biological refund. It ensures the parents retain the energy and health required to survive the current environmental crisis and spawn again when they find a truly secure location.
The caloric math behind that is staggering. They're literally calculating the return on investment of their own genetics.
Yes, precisely.
It proves how incredibly high the stakes are for Aang. Every movement of a pot, every splash of new water is a life or death calculation for the ecosystem. Which makes you wonder why Aang is dealing with balconies and makeshift styrofoam boxes in the first place.
The constraints of the hobby.
Exactly, and the journal actually addresses this constraint directly. Aang acknowledges the textbook rule of breeding fishes.
The standard operating procedure for dedicated hobbyists.
Right. Aang notes that ideally you should have a smaller, highly controlled, dedicated breeding tank and a completely separate, much larger grow-out tank for the juveniles. That is the accepted science of how to do this safely.
The ideal scenario.
But due to physical space limitations, Aang admits to always having to keep multiple generations within the same tank, or resorting to these messy, hacked-together setups. Aang mentions a dream of one day having a proper fish room where a textbook setup would be possible, but concludes with the philosophy, for the time being, we'll stick to whatever arrangement we can manage.
And this raises an important question about the nature of expertise. We tend to view the textbook method, like the pristine fish room with automated sumps, precise digital heaters, and dedicated tanks for every life stage as the pinnacle of knowledge.
Sure, it looks the most professional.
But a fully automated system doesn't require you to deeply understand the mechanics of the environment. The machines do the balancing for you. When you are operating with extreme constraints, like using a leaky foam box on a balcony, you cannot rely on automation.
Because isn't this the quintessential struggle of almost every pursuit in life?
Oh, totally.
We all know the correct textbook way to do things, but reality, be it space or time or money, forces us to hack together a messy but functional solution. You have to become the automation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are the one manually topping off the water, judging the temperature drop, and observing the behavioral shifts of the cichlids to see if they're getting too stressed by the juveniles.
Right.
The constraints actually force a much deeper, more intimate understanding of the nitrogen cycle and biological behavior. Aang is successfully fostering life and managing complex multi-generational housing crises without a single piece of textbook equipment.
Wow.
It requires an acute daily intimacy with the ecosystem. The messy, hacked-together solution demands far more actual skill than the sterile, well-funded laboratory setup.
That is such a great point. It totally reframes how we look at the limitations in our own projects. We always think, if I just had the right tools or the dedicated space or the textbook setup, this would be so much easier.
And it might be easier, but you wouldn't learn as much.
Exactly. Aang's journal proves that the constraints aren't hindering the process. They are actively shaping a much more resilient form of expertise. The leaky box isn't a failure of infrastructure. It's the catalyst for the entire biological event.
It highlights the incredible adaptability of both the hobbyists and the wildlife. We build our cities in our backyards, completely altering the natural landscape, and yet these micro-ecosystems find a way to map their territories, simulate their rainy seasons, and fiercely propagate inside our discarded garden pots.
They just make it work.
The drive for life simply scales itself to whatever physical dimensions it is given.
The sheer resilience of these microecosystems is it's the ultimate takeaway here. You don't need a massive lake to witness complex biological warfare and evolutionary calculus. You just need to pay close attention to a styrofoam cooler.
Very true.
But before we wrap this up, there is one final detail buried in Aang's text that completely shifts how we view the social structure of this pond.
Oh, this is the best part.
When Aang mentions moving the older generation of fish, the juveniles that are being sent to the guppy pond, Aang specifies that these fishes were from the first spawn of, quote, the other female pair.
That phrase, dropped so casually in the journal, is arguably the most astonishing piece of biological data in the entire entry. The other female pair.
We've spent this entire time analyzing the anxiety of moving a newly bonded male-female pair. But Aang reveals that the previous successful generation of fish, the ones strong enough to be moved to the bustling guppy pond, were raised by two females.
It is a remarkable behavioral phenomenon.
Wait, how does that even work?
In the confined space of a hobbyist setup, when ideal mating conditions or suitable males are unavailable, female cichlids possess the behavioral elasticity to bond with each other.
Wow.
They will go through the entire complex courtship ritual, lay their eggs in a secure cave, and fiercely guard that territory together with the same lethal aggression as a traditional pair. The maternal and territorial instincts completely override the reproductive limitations of the environment.
That is just amazing. It forces you to marvel at just how fiercely adaptable nature truly is. I mean, even trapped in a makeshift outdoor pond, battling the elements and dealing with a giant human moving their furniture around, these fish are continually rewriting the textbook on survival, on social structure, and resilience.
Nature always finds a way.
It really does. Next time you look at a simple puddle or a piece of garden clutter, consider the hidden, complex worlds that might be mapping their existence right under your nose. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.